Let's start this story with a glimpse into our lives. I'm Dirk Van Vliet, part of the married duo alongside my wife, Gretchen. We're both 42, standing tall, with trim figures, blonde hair, and blue eyes, a nod to our Dutch ancestry. Our Indian and African American friends might perceive us differently, but among our Caucasian peers, we'd likely rate around an 8 on the attractiveness scale. We have 3 wonderful children, Jurgen, 18, Finn, 14, and Tess, 16, all sharing our tall, blonde, and blue-eyed traits. They're the absolute joys of our lives, a sentiment I'm certain Gretchen shares. Our marriage has been what one might call comfortable. We get along well, seldom argue, share similar political views, and approach child-rearing with the same principles. We believe in setting firm rules while also providing ample love, attention, and support without coddling. It seems to have paid off, as our children are well-adjusted, kind, determined, and ambitious. Professionally, Gretchen is a successful commercial real estate agent, while I manage quality control engineering at a startup-turned-multinational corporation. Money isn't a concern, and we reside in a lovely home in a Northern Virginia suburb of Washington, D.C. As for our sex life, well, mine at least, it's been comfortable too. Gretchen and I engage in what I'd consider quality lovemaking about twice a week on average, more during vacations or when the kids are away for an extended period. It's a far cry from my more promiscuous days before meeting Gretchen. Before Gretchen came into my life at age 22, I was quite the ladies' man. We tied the knot just 18 months after meeting. Prior to Gretchen, my longest relationship was with Gina Martinelli when I was 20, between my sophomore and junior college years. Gina couldn't be more different from Gretchen. A fiery Italian, Gina weighed no more than 100 pounds soaking wet. Standing over a foot taller, my fair skin contrasted starkly with her olive complexion. At the time, Gina, a recent divorcee at 29, had 2 young children and matched Gretchen and me in volatility. Gina and I crossed paths when I accidentally bumped into her car in a mall parking lot the day after my final college exam. It's a wonder we ever got together, considering how furious she was about the damage to her car. If her kids hadn't been present, I think she might have taken a swing at me with a tire iron. By providing all my contact information, escorting her to a repair shop, taking responsibility for the repairs, and driving her and her kids home, I managed to calm her down. I found myself mesmerized by her flawless thighs peeking out from under her short skirt as I drove her home, and she clearly noticed, flashing me a big grin. How exactly we hit it off and progressed from there, I can't say for certain, but within 3 days of our fender-bender encounter, we were going at it like rabbits. Within 2 weeks, I had even moved into her cozy little house for the summer, telling my parents I had landed a better summer job elsewhere. Gina was undeniably cute, sexy, streetwise, and, as mentioned before, volatile, but her most remarkable traits were her passion and sexual intensity. The woman had a sexual appetite like no other I had encountered and wanted it all the time. There was nothing off the table, as long as it didn't pose a risk of injury or disease. She particularly enjoyed it when I took her from behind while simultaneously using a butt plug or vibrator on her, all while teasing one of her tiny yet highly sensitive nipples. Our orgasms, synchronized with hers, were nothing short of mind-blowing. If they were earthquakes, they'd register a 9.0 on the Richter scale. We made love at least once a day, often 3 times, throughout the entire 3 months of that summer. Even during her period, when she was particularly irritable but also incredibly horny, we found ways to satisfy each other in the shower or outdoors, never missing a beat. Gina even visited me for 4 weekends over the next 2 months while I was back at college, leaving her kids with her parents and younger sister, who were more than happy to help out. During those visits, we made love at least 6 times each weekend. Neither Gina nor I ever envisioned our relationship leading to marriage. It wasn't just the age difference or the fact that she had 2 children, our personalities didn't quite align, and her heritage held significance for her and her family. On the last weekend she visited me in college, she informed me that she had met a wealthy, older Italian man named Vince Aliotto who adored her and had her parents' approval. While I was saddened by the news, Gina gave me an experience that remains unmatched and likely never will be. The hour before she left, she took me on a ride like no other, switching effortlessly between cowgirl and reverse cowgirl while maintaining an otherworldly fervor, all while managing to lavish attention on my testicles. Our climax, accompanied by her tight grip on my cock, seemed to last an eternity before we both drifted into a blissful unconsciousness. Gina and I made love so frequently during our 5-month relationship that by the time Gretchen and I had been married for a year, the number of times we had been intimate easily surpassed all my previous encounters combined. Unlike with Gretchen, our lovemaking was passionate and uninhibited, exploring a variety of positions and incorporating toys. However, with Gretchen, our physical connection was more restrained, limited to traditional positions like missionary, doggy style, and occasionally cowgirl, and without any additional accessories. One Tuesday afternoon in May, I found myself unexpectedly in the lobby of the W Hotel in Washington due to a last-minute request from a customer staying there before traveling to Europe. To my surprise, while I was at the front desk, I spotted Gretchen exiting the elevator with a man of similar height and age, their intimacy evident as they walked arm in arm. Despite my initial shock and anger, I managed to contain my emotions, focusing on my customer's needs. Later, as I drove back to my office, I struggled to maintain composure, nearly causing several accidents due to my flustered state. Once back at my office, I realized I needed time to process what I had seen and decided to take a fake business trip to buy myself some time. Arriving at my daughter Tessa's high school tennis practice later that evening, her cheerful greeting momentarily lifted my spirits, reminding me of the importance of maintaining my connection with my children despite the turmoil in my personal life. When I returned home, Gretchen seemed to sense that something was bothering me, but the lively dinner conversation with the kids helped to divert her attention, giving me a chance to calm my nerves. Thankfully, she didn't initiate sex that night, allowing me to avoid any potential explosive reactions. The next morning, I called Gretchen to inform her of an unexpected out-of-town trip for work. I mentioned that I'd swing by the house to grab some clothes and promised to call her and the kids later in the evening. During the evenings of Wednesday and Thursday, I stayed at one of our company-owned apartments in Arlington, Virginia, maintaining regular contact with Gretchen and the kids over the phone. While I did handle some actual business-related tasks during those days, my primary focus was on researching various ways to address my situation. This involved consultations with legal, financial, and investigative professionals, as well as extensive online research. After careful consideration, I concluded that I needed to stay in my marriage until our youngest, Finn, left for college in 4 years. To prepare for the eventual divorce, I needed to accomplish several tasks, including securing funds, obtaining a private investigator's report, conducting DNA tests on the kids, prepaying their college tuition, and collaborating with a pharmacist on a special compound. Additionally, I aimed to establish separate tax filings with Gretchen's agreement, citing advice from tax counsel. By compartmentalizing my concerns, I managed to maintain a semblance of normalcy in my interactions with Gretchen over the following month. I purposely delayed obtaining certain information to ensure that I could continue to act normally around her until I was ready to address the situation more decisively. Regarding the DNA testing, I was confident that the man Gretchen was with couldn't be the father of any of my children. None of my kids resembled him, and they all shared traits from both Gretchen and me. While I didn't expect any negative results from the testing, I needed to confirm paternity. However, I had no interest in knowing if some of the kids were biologically mine and others weren't. So, I devised an unconventional approach. I intentionally mixed up the vials containing the kids' DNA swabs and left them unlabeled. I labeled my DNA vial as number 1. When I submitted the samples to the lab, I instructed them to determine if the person in vial number 1 was related to those in the other vials and to provide information on the likely relationship without identifying the sexes of the individuals in the unlabeled vials. This approach proved fortunate when, almost a month later, the lab technician called me with the results. He informed me that individuals corresponding to vials A and C were strongly biologically related to the person in vial number 1, likely indicating paternity. However, the individual corresponding to vial B had no biological relationship with the person in vial number 1, despite sharing some traits. When I asked about the probability of the parents of the person in vial B having brown hair and brown eyes, the technician chuckled and mentioned it was about 1%. I thanked him and requested the report be sent to my business address, ensuring no male/female information about the individuals in the other vials was included. You got it. Also, the cash payment you gave me with the instructions to proceed is sufficient to cover everything. In fact, we can refund $50, so I don't need anything more, Tom responded. Keep the $50 with my gratitude, I chuckled, though my mood was far from happy. Now I knew that one of my kids wasn't biologically mine but likely had a blonde, blue-eyed biological father. I didn't know which kid. That was intentional because I didn't want to treat any of them differently by accident. After knowing them for at least 14 years each and never suspecting anything based on their appearance, I wouldn't even attempt to guess, and I wouldn't have been able to guess correctly even if I tried. The DNA lab results also indicated that in addition to the man I saw Gretchen with, she had at least one other affair, with the biological father of one of my kids. The information from the DNA lab made some aspects of the PI's findings redundant, but not all. As expected, Judy James, the supervisory PI assigned to my case, provided details of Gretchen's current affair. Judy gave me an oral report before handing over the complete dossier she had collected. The guy's name is Winston Tangren. He's 41 years old, lives in New Jersey, has been married for 20 years, and has two 15-year-old fraternal twin daughters. He works in commercial real estate, which is how he met your wife. In the month we've been observing them, they twice visited hotel rooms, once at a Hilton Hotel in Rockville, Maryland, and another time in Springfield, Virginia. On both occasions, they spent about 2 hours together in the room, recently showered when they left, were affectionate, and exchanged passionate farewells. They arrived and left separately, once on a Tuesday between noon and 2 p.m. in Rockville, and once on a Wednesday between 2 and 4 p.m. in Springfield, Judy related. Did you find out how long this has been going on? I inquired. We can't be certain, but they met almost exactly a year ago, and one informant, the only person who seems to suspect an affair, suggests about 6 months, Judy responded. I nodded solemnly. There's something in our written report that's significantly understated for reasons I can't disclose. I'll deny telling you this if questioned later, she said with a smile. I leaned in to listen as she continued. We mentioned in the report that an operative may have determined, though he couldn't be sure due to the illegality of obtaining phone records, that Gretchen has a second cell phone with the number 571-555XXXX for communication with Tangren and possibly others. Again, I can't elaborate, but the may is a gross understatement. That grabbed my attention. I simply nodded in acknowledgement. I can provide more details, but everything I have is documented in the dossier, and there are also photos included. Anything else you need? Judy continued. No, that's sufficient. Do I owe anything beyond the retainer? I inquired. $308.40, she replied, handing me a bill. You're quite meticulous, aren't you? I chuckled as I handed her $300 bills and a 10. Treat yourself to a cup of coffee with the extra $1.60, I said with a smile. Thanks for the generous tip, she smiled back. The disgraced pharmacist was eager to take on my task. I didn't disclose my real name and only communicated with him using a burner phone, except for our initial meeting and the one following my visit to the PI. The task I assigned him was to create a drug that would be undetectable in sherry, induce sexual arousal, and dissipate completely within 8 hours without any lasting adverse effects. Despite his dubious reputation, he was a skilled chemist, and he seemed to have dedicated significant effort to this project. What do you have for me, Mr. Sun? I asked. I've developed 4 potential compounds. You can experiment to determine which is most effective, and once you decide, I can produce more, he replied. Excellent, I said. Please describe them to me. He began by explaining the first compound, which he called alpha. It was primarily based on the mucuna bean, containing high levels of L-dopa, which stimulates dopamine production. A small amount of MDMA, also known as ecstasy, was added to enhance its effects by releasing serotonin and norepinephrine. To mitigate any adverse effects of MDMA, he included a form of pycnogenol, which not only counteracted its negative effects but also had an aphrodisiac effect on women. How should it be administered, and in what dosage? I inquired. Mr. Sun showed me a small bottle with an eyedropper. Just 2 to 3 drops directly into the glass before pouring in the sherry, lightly stirred with a metal stirrer, and you're set. The effects will begin in about 30 minutes and peak within 45 minutes, lasting for a couple of hours. Understood, I nodded. What else do you have? He described 3 other compounds, none of which seemed as promising as alpha, and all of which, despite his attempts to downplay them, had potential side effects. He reassured me multiple times that alpha would not have any adverse effects. After his presentation, I paid him the remaining amount owed in cash, and he informed me of the price for future purchases of alpha. How much alpha would I need to purchase to last me 4.5 years? I asked. A liter, he replied promptly. Will it degrade over time? I inquired. Not at all, the ingredients and carrier are highly stable. Just shake the container every week or so, and it will be fine, he assured me. If I buy a liter next time we meet, how much would that cost? I inquired further. $5,000, he responded quickly. We shook hands, and I departed. Alpha proved to be incredibly effective that I didn't even bother trying the other compounds. One Saturday night, after returning from a party, I offered Gretchen a glass of sherry with 2 drops of alpha, which she eagerly accepted. I pretended to sip sherry as well. After separate showers, as we prepared for bed, Gretchen became quite playful. We engaged in passionate lovemaking, transitioning into intense sexual activity unlike anything we'd experienced before. By the 6th time I gave her sherry with alpha, I increased the dose to 3 drops and introduced a thin butt plug. Despite initial hesitation, Gretchen embraced the heightened stimulation, leading to unforgettable simultaneous orgasms. After purchasing a liter of alpha, within 6 months of introducing it to Gretchen, she became more adventurous in bed, experiencing stronger orgasms and showing a desire for multiple rounds per session. I began taking enhancement pills to keep pace with her newfound energy. Our sexual frequency increased from twice a week with 1 orgasm for me per session to 4 times a week with 2 orgasms for me per session and numerous orgasms for her. While I didn't give her alpha every night, I did on nights when we desired intimacy. During this time, I discovered Gretchen's secret cell phone in her office drawer and discreetly bugged it to monitor her communications. Through this, I learned when she planned to meet Tangren, which occurred approximately once every 2 weeks. On those nights, I ensured she received alpha, persisting even when she resisted. I also took enhancement pills and engaged in various sexual activities, leaving her fulfilled and exhausted. About 3 months later, Gretchen ceased communication with Tangren, although it didn't affect my plans moving forward. She became even more receptive to sexual exploration afterward. During the 4+ years that I lived with Gretchen, whom I regarded as nothing more than a sexual partner without emotional connection, I executed the remaining aspects of my plan. I convinced Gretchen to file separate tax returns, prepaid our children's college tuition despite temporary financial strain, stashed away over $100,000 in cash, and falsely reported significant gambling losses to funnel money into an offshore account during my annual Las Vegas trips for a convention. Throughout this period, I refrained from dwelling on which of my children might not be biologically mine and maintained strong relationships with all 3. In fact, my bond with Tess seemed even stronger than with the boys, as she often sought my advice more readily than Gretchen, which slightly irked Gretchen. Finally, the day arrived when Finn left for college, about 4.5 years after I discovered Gretchen's affair and the paternity revelation. We packed his belongings into the largest SUV, promising him his own car if he maintained good grades, just as we had done with Jürgen and Tess, both of whom had met their end of the bargain. Finn headed to James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, excited to pursue business management. The night before our departure, Gretchen and I had one last intense sexual encounter. The following morning, after dropping Finn off at his dorm, we embarked on our return journey. I ensured all belongings I desired from our house were already relocated to my new condo near my office. As we made a pit stop at the Woodstock exit on Route 81, I coordinated with a process server discreetly. After confirming his location, I left Gretchen at the rest stop and drove away. Ignoring her calls, I proceeded to my condo and enjoyed a peaceful night's sleep. Gretchen was furious, to put it mildly. I knew we had to address the situation, so when she called my office on Monday morning, I picked up. She unleashed a torrent of anger, but I hung up. She called back, and I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate yelling. However, I agreed to arrange a meeting if she could control her temper. Although still visibly upset, she managed to keep her voice down. "You're a real piece of work, leaving me stranded 90 miles from home and serving me with divorce papers." "What's your deal?" she exclaimed. "My deal is having a cheating wife," I responded calmly. "We can discuss it tomorrow. Let's meet at your office's conference room at 6 p.m. "Why not our house?" she questioned. "You mean your house?" "Sorry, but I have too many unpleasant memories there, living with a cheating wife and all," I retorted. "If you want to talk, it'll be at your office. Just text me which conference room." "Bye, can't wait," I concluded before ending the call. Exactly at 6 p.m. the next day, I entered conference room B in Gretchen's office. To my surprise, a man in a suit was sitting beside her. Without hesitation, I demanded, "Who are you, and why are you here?" "Can we refrain from using profanity?" Gretchen interjected. "Fine, but first, who is he?" I persisted. "I'm Dr. John Bellows, a marriage counselor." Gretchen asked me to join our discussion, he explained, extending his hand, which I declined to shake. "All right, Dr. Bellows, if Gretchen insists, you can stay, but only if you sign a confidentiality agreement," I stated firmly as I sat across from them. "That's not necessary, as it's part of my professional ethics." He began, but I cut him off. "Sorry, but you either sign it, leave, or I walk out," I interjected. Confidentiality agreements were standard in my line of work, so I had 2 versions in my briefcase at all times, along with various other forms. "No problem," I chuckled. I pulled out one of our standard confidentiality agreements and quickly made some revisions to tailor it to our situation. "Take a look at this. If you sign and date it, Gretchen and I will do the same, and then we'll ask my soon-to-be ex to make copies for each of us." I could sense Gretchen's frustration, but she and Bellows reviewed the document. "Seems reasonable enough," Bellows commented. He signed it and passed it to Gretchen, who also signed. Finally, I added my signature. Gretchen made copies for herself and Bellows, then returned the original to me. "Thanks," I said, returning the document to my briefcase. "Now, what's on your mind, Gretchen? I thought everything was clear in the divorce papers you were served." "Firstly, I want an apology for calling me a cheating slut over the phone," she demanded, arms crossed. Surprising her, I replied, "Okay, I apologize. Although you have been unfaithful and may fit the definition of a slut, there was no need for that language. From now on, if I refer to you indirectly, I'll use the term unfaithful spouse. How's that?" Bellows and Gretchen reacted with some objections, which I politely acknowledged before Gretchen continued, "If you suspect me of infidelity, why didn't you file for adultery?" "Firstly, I lived with you for over 4 years after the known adultery, which wouldn't meet Virginia's legal requirements for granting a divorce on those grounds. Secondly, I don't want to subject you to the fallout if our family and friends, especially Jurgen, Tess, and Finn, learn about your affairs," I explained. "Didn't you jump the gun by filing?" "You haven't met the Virginia standard for a no-fault divorce," Bellows interjected. "Technically, yes. However, my attorney assures me that by establishing a separate residence as of the filing date, the court will overlook this technicality," I responded. "What evidence do you have to support your accusation of infidelity?" Bellows inquired, taking the lead in questioning. I retrieved an envelope from my briefcase containing photos of Gretchen and Tangren sharing passionate kisses, leaving hotel rooms, text messages between them, and a summary of the PI's report. As they reviewed the evidence, I casually mentioned, "By the way, Gretchen, so it doesn't catch you off guard, a complete copy of what I just showed you was hand-delivered to Melissa Tangren today." Gretchen's expression shifted from shock to anger as she continued to examine the evidence. The contents of my envelope clearly rattled Bellows, but he pressed on. "It's evident that you've forgiven Gretchen, given that you've been living with her for the past 4+ years. She hasn't seen Tangren in over 3 years, and according to her, your intimate relations have improved during this time." "That's where you're mistaken, Doc," I retorted with a smirk. I haven't made love to her since I witnessed her kissing and flirting with Tangren at the W Hotel in Washington over 4 years ago. Gretchen's expression turned to shock and dismay as she started to cry and hurriedly left the room. Bellows excused himself, promising to bring her back, and followed her. I waited for about 15 minutes, considering leaving, but then they returned. Gretchen's eyes were red, but she had stopped crying. She struggled to speak through her emotions. "I've loved you all our married life. Why can't you forgive me? Tangren was a mistake. I'll never be with anyone else again. The problem is the affair I found out about at least 19 years ago. I don't know when it started or ended, or if it's still going on. That's what I can't get past," I snapped. Gretchen denied any knowledge of it, her voice breaking. Initially, I hadn't planned to disclose to Gretchen that I knew one of our children wasn't biologically mine. However, sensing the gravity of the situation, I realized clarity was necessary, even if it led to complications. An idea struck me. "Here's the deal, we'll amend our confidentiality agreement so that if you, Gretchen, disclose what I'm about to reveal to anyone else, with Bellows as our witness but also bound to confidentiality, you'll owe me $1 million. Agreed?" After consulting with Bellows, Gretchen reluctantly agreed. I added a paragraph to the original agreement, and we all signed and dated it. Gretchen made copies, and I retained the original. "Now, what's the secret?" Gretchen demanded, arms crossed. "In simple terms, one of Jürgen, Tess, or Finn is not my biological child. I don't know which one, and I've made sure not to find out to avoid any psychological impact on how I treat them, but I'm certain," I confessed solemnly. Gretchen was stunned into silence, while Bellows asked, "How do you know?" "I used DNA testing," I replied, handing them another folder from my briefcase. "You can review this for the next 15 minutes, but you cannot make copies, and I won't provide you with one either." I clarified that I purposely designed the inquiry so that I remained unaware of the identities corresponding to vials AC. As Gretchen and Bellows perused the report, Gretchen's demeanor grew increasingly despondent. After about 10 minutes, they finished reading. Retrieving the DNA file, I closed my briefcase and stated, "As you can see, Gretchen, there's no hope for reconciliation. I left you in Woodstock as an outlet for my immense anger, and now you need to sign the separation agreement included with the divorce papers to end our marriage in 1 year." As I departed, Gretchen sobbed, "Our marriage wasn't a sham." I shut the door, blocking out any further conversation. Gretchen reluctantly signed the papers, marking the beginning of a new chapter. However, challenges persisted. Our children struggled with the situation, and while I tried to remain positive, promising a cordial relationship with Gretchen and joint celebrations of holidays and special occasions, the atmosphere remained tense. 2 months later, I had an unexpected visitor, Winston Tangren. Fueled by alcohol, he barged into my office, blaming me for ruining his life by involving his wife, Melissa. Seizing the opportunity, I retaliated with a single punch and kick, ensuring it was proportionate to his attack. Despite his injured state, I faced no charges, thanks to witness statements and security footage corroborating my version of events. Unbeknownst to Gretchen, her family attempted an intervention with me, even proposing mediation. I was surprised by Gretchen's father Hans's participation, considering his Dutch pride, although we always had a good relationship. However, Gretchen's mother Lotte and sister Julia were determined to salvage the marriage, leaving Hans with little choice in the matter. Surprisingly, Julia's husband Stan also joined the intervention. Fortunately, they called ahead before arriving at my condo. I greeted them politely, offering beverages and cookies. While I had always respected Hans, Lotte, and Julia, I had less affinity for Stan, but saw no reason to be impolite unless the situation escalated. The conversation unfolded predictably. At times, Lotte and Julia became emotional, shedding a few tears, while Hans expressed his disappointment respectfully. At that moment, I had no inkling about the biological father of one of my children. Given my children's appearance and characteristics, I couldn't identify any likely candidates from our past. However, when Stan made a rude comment during the discussion, a realization struck me. During the period when Julia and Stan lived near us, Gretchen's relationship with her sister was complicated and competitive, which later eased after Stan and Julia moved away. Although Gretchen and Stan never exhibited any affectionate behavior in my presence, knowing Gretchen's past behavior, it was conceivable she had a fling with Stan to one-up her sister. While Stan had since gained weight and appeared disheveled, at the time he lived near us, he had blonde hair, was only slightly shorter than me, and had blue eyes. Despite not possessing refined features like Gretchen or me, he was reasonably attractive and athletic. My mind drifted for a moment as a thought raced through my mind, but I quickly regained focus and continued to be cordial to Latte, Julia, and Hans. By the time they left, nearly 2 hours later, they understood that a reconciliation between Gretchen and me was unlikely. However, I assured them that I would always cherish our relationship, excluding Stan, and remain in touch. I falsely claimed to hold no ill feelings towards Gretchen, citing a lack of romantic spark and my desire to avoid a loveless existence. In the final negotiation before the divorce was finalized, Gretchen and I had one lingering point of contention. Though it mattered more to her than to me, I felt I had already been accommodating enough. I proposed a deal: if she truthfully answered one question, I would concede the point and end the dispute. We dismissed the attorneys, and I asked Gretchen directly if she had ever been involved with her brother-in-law Stan. Her reaction confirmed my suspicions, so I didn't pay much attention to her denial. I thanked her for the response, apologized for the question, instructed the attorneys to concede the point to Gretchen, and even extended an invitation to lunch. Knowing she had a showing immediately after, I wanted to ease her discomfort, making her believe I accepted her denial. She declined, suggesting a rain check, to which I agreed insincerely. As revenge, I planned to physically harm Stan without causing emotional or financial harm to Julia. A year after suspecting Stan's involvement with one of my children, an opportunity arose. While Stan was on a fishing trip near a conference I was attending, I disguised myself, subdued him, and administered a beating, leaving a warning before departing unnoticed. I was never suspected of anything, and Stan kept our encounter to himself. The few times he saw me afterward, he gave me odd looks but remained silent. 3 years after my divorce, things were going as smoothly as one could hope. Gretchen, her family, and mine attended Jürgen's and Tess's college graduations together, were amiable at Jürgen's wedding, and celebrated Tess's 21st birthday. Gretchen also kept the DNA situation of our kids confidential. With revenge on both Winston and Stan, and no chance of uncovering further affairs, I was content, except for one thing. I hadn't found a replacement for Gretchen. Despite dating and occasional intimacy, nothing matched the fulfilling experiences I had with Gina or the love-making sessions with Gretchen post-alpha. Then, fate intervened. At a local trade show, a woman in one of the booths reminded me of Gina Martinelli. As the day wound down, I approached her. "I don't mean to be forward, but do you know Gina Martinelli?" She did a double take. "That's my sister, though she's Gina Aliotto now." "Are you her younger sister who used to babysit before she met Vince Aliotto?" "That's me," she grinned. "Gabriella, back to Martinelli after my divorce." Gabriella exuded the same allure as her sister but with less volatility. We hit it off instantly. With her kids out of college and no romantic interests, I vowed to become hers. 2 days after our 4th date, spent exploring each other's bodies, I'm filled with anticipation for our evening together. While we may not match the vigor of our younger days, our connection is pure ecstasy. As I share this story, I'm excited about the night ahead with Gabriella at my condo. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Write your opinion in the comments.